It's strange, isn't it? How certain moments arrive exactly when you stop expecting anything at all. You may have opened this video casually, almost absently, the way someone glances at the sky without expecting the weather to speak. And yet here you are, caught in a quiet cross-current of curiosity, as if something small but significant tugged at the edge of your awareness. It's almost humorous how life does this. Not with grand announcements or fireworks, but with a subtle nudge, a shift so soft you might have missed it if you'd blinked. There's a reason the moment feels slightly out of place, like a doorway you don't remember seeing yesterday. It's the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't random at all. Synchronicity isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the uncanny sense that something has matched your timing with startling accuracy. Even if part of you feels restless, or worn thin, or quietly lost under the surface, there is another part, older, wiser, that recognizes when life is whispering, "Look here." And perhaps you've brushed against this sensation before. That sense of divine timing that doesn't care about your schedule, that gentle impression that something is guiding you when you least have the energy to guide yourself. It happens in the smallest ways. A sentence overheard, a memory resurfacing, a thought arriving with the precision of a falling leaf. Life nudges you, not because you're prepared, but because it knows preparation is often the illusion that keeps you from noticing the obvious. There is a rhythm beneath everything, a larger pattern, patient and intricate. It's been moving long before this moment and will keep moving long after. But right now, it has curled itself around you with uncanny precision. And that's what makes this particular second feel different. Not heavier, not louder, just aligned in a way you can't explain but instinctively understand. Still, the question lingers, gentle as a hand on the shoulder. If timing truly works this mysteriously, why does guidance only seem to appear when you're too tired, too stretched, too worn out to go looking for it? Why is it that the universe waits until the moment you stop searching to show you exactly what you needed to see? You've probably spent years believing you were late to something. An opportunity, a version of yourself, a destination you can't quite name but have always felt you should have reached by now. Yet here's the quieter truth. The one that slips in only when you stop bracing for impact. You are not behind. You never were. You are exactly where you must be, as unglamorous or uncertain as that position sometimes feels. Life has this way of moving in curves instead of straight lines. While the mind demands milestones and deadlines, the deeper rhythm underneath everything pays them no attention at all. It's less interested in how fast you're moving and more in how open you are when something finally arrives. And when something does arrive, a person, an insight, an unexpected turning, it rarely announces itself as destiny. It comes disguised in the ordinary, almost shy in how it approaches. A passing comment from a stranger, a thought that drifts in while you're brushing your teeth, a moment of clarity that feels borrowed from somewhere beyond effort. This is the hidden mechanism of timing. Your life is not arranged by luck or accident, but by alignment. Not the loud, cinematic kind you see in movies, but the soft alignment that occurs when your inner landscape clears just enough for something meaningful to slip through. You may not feel ready, you may not feel strong, but readiness is less about confidence and more about receiving. Life does not ask you to arrive polished. It only asks that you show up. And if this moment feels like an unexpected exhale, as if something inside you loosened without permission, That's often the first sign you're aligning with what's been trying to reach you for some time. You don't have to force the meaning. You don't have to decode some cosmic riddle. Simply noticing is enough. And if this gentle pause is already easing something in you, you're welcome to tap the like button. Not out of obligation, but because these reminders tend to reach others at the exact moment they need them, too. But this raises the more curious question. The one life keeps close to its chest. If nothing is ever truly an accident, why does guidance hide inside such ordinary moments? Why doesn't truth arrive with thunder instead of a whisper? That mystery, too, has its own timing. There is a certain kind of morning that doesn't announce itself. No epiphany perched on the windowsill. No thunder delivering messages, just the faint hum of a radiator, the gentle heaviness of winter air, and the soft light of dawn slanting across an unmade bed. That was the kind of morning Mara woke into. One of those quiet hours where the world asks nothing of you, yet your mind insists you owe it everything. She sat upright, the apartment still smelling faintly of coffee grounds from yesterday. On her lap rested a leather-bound notebook that had traveled with her through 3 different apartments and just as many life phases. She bought it in a burst of conviction, back when she believed clarity could be forced into existence if you just purchased the right tools. A notebook for wisdom, a pen for revelation. Simple, she thought. But each page told a different story. Aborted sentences, half-formed insights, moments where she started certain and ended in confusion. Ink trails of effort, pressure, trying too hard. She opened the notebook again, as if this time her life might finally cooperate. But the page remained as mute and unyielding as ever. Her breath thinned. That old thought flickered up. I should know my path by now. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply familiar. Like a hallway she kept finding herself in without knowing how she arrived. The sky outside softened to a gray blue, the city stretching awake in the distance. Mara sat perfectly still, a kind of surrender she didn't choose so much as fall into. Something in her, tired of pushing, tired of pretending, let out a soft internal sigh. And in that tiny clearing, that moment when the mind dropped its heavy insistence, something small surfaced. You don't have to know today. Not a revelation, not a prophecy, just a sentence that felt like warm water poured over a clenched fist. It landed in her chest with the gentleness of something that had been waiting a long time to be said. And in that private quiet, a doorway cracked open. Not to certainty, not to a mapped-out future, but to the simple relief of not forcing what wasn't ready to appear. A small reminder that insight often arrives only after we stop pretending to chase it, which raises a curious question of its own. Why is it that the moment you stop trying to drag meaning into existence is the moment it decides to walk over on its own? There is a peculiar rhythm to the way understanding enters a life. It does not march in with authority or wait for the perfect combination of circumstances, as much as the mind likes to insist otherwise. Instead, it behaves more like sunlight, always present, always available, but only felt when the clouds are thin enough for you to sense its warmth. Life doesn't wait for your perfection. It waits for your openness. People often imagine readiness as a kind of achievement, a polished version of themselves stepping onto a well-lit stage. But readiness, the real kind, is quieter. It is the softening of something brittle inside you. It is the loosening of a long-gripped fear. It is the moment when the soil finally breaks enough for the seed to push through, not because the seed tried harder, but because the season turned on its own. You felt this before, perhaps more times than you realize. Those moments when you suddenly understand a sentence you dismissed years ago. When a saying your grandmother repeated finally lands with weight. When a truth you've read 100 times becomes obvious only on the 101st. It isn't that the truth changed. It's that you ripened into the version of yourself that could finally receive it. And yet people blame themselves for not understanding sooner, as if wisdom were a deadline they missed. They speak to themselves harshly, wondering why they feel stuck, why they feel behind, why clarity doesn't arrive on demand. But clarity is not a machine. It is a visitor. It comes when the inner room is ready, when the noise has settled, when the mind stops gripping the world with white knuckles. Think of the moments in your life when a realization arrived mid-step, mid-breath, mid-ordinary task. You weren't striving. You weren't staging some grand breakthrough. You were simply open. Accidentally open, perhaps, but open nonetheless. This is the physics of readiness. Insight equals timing. X openness. A formula not of effort, but of alignment. And if it feels like your timing has been strange lately, off, unpredictable, disrupted, it may not be a failure at all. It may be the early trembling of something inside you preparing to shift. But if timing is this intricate, this precise, then why does it so often feel like you're stuck in the waiting room of your own life, unsure of when the next door will open? That answer lives in the next turn of the rhythm. There comes a point in every life when the mind tightens its grip, not out of strength, but out of fear. It happens quietly, almost imperceptibly. You sit at your desk, or pace your kitchen, or lie awake staring at the ceiling, convinced that if you could just think a little harder, push a little more, plan a little further ahead, life might finally fall in line. Control feels like safety, like a railing you can hold on to while the world moves unpredictably around you. But notice what happens inside the body when you try to steer everything. The breath shallows into your chest. The jaw tenses. Thoughts chase each other in exhausted circles. It's a familiar choreography, one learned long ago in moments when you were told that certainty was the only way to feel secure. And so you try to engineer your path as if life were a complex machine that would obey if you just tightened the right bolts. The trouble is that life isn't mechanical. It never has been. It is fluid, shifting, responsive. When you demand certainty from something that refuses to be fixed, you create friction not with the world, but within yourself. And that friction sounds like frustration, like anxiety, like the quiet panic of believing you should already know what comes next. It's the belief that your worth depends on your ability to predict the future. There is a quiet humor in this, the kind you only see afterward, because life keeps offering evidence that the moments that changed you most were the ones you never planned. The unexpected job offer, the unanticipated conversation, the chance encounter that became a turning point. Yet the mind still insists, if I don't hold on, I'll fall behind. But behind what? Behind whom? The fear of being late has shaped more lives than actual lateness ever has. And so the crisis of control grows. The more tightly you grip, the more life slips between your fingers. Not to punish you, but to redirect you toward the truth you keep resisting. That certainty is not the source of clarity. Openness is. Which leads to the real question waiting beneath the surface. What happens when you stop gripping the wheel, even for a moment? What unfolds when your white-knuckled certainty finally gives way to something softer, something spacious, something unpredictable? That answer begins to reveal itself in the next shift of the rhythm, where uncertainty stops being an enemy and becomes a guide. There is a peculiar freedom that enters a life the moment a person loosens their insistence on knowing. Uncertainty, which once felt like a threat, begins to look more like open sky, vast, uncharted, quietly inviting. It doesn't arrive all at once. It steals in slowly, the way dawn sneaks across a room before you realize the night has retreated. And suddenly you notice you are breathing more deeply. Your thoughts aren't sprinting. The world hasn't changed, but something in you has relaxed enough to let it move as it wishes. Walking without a map has never meant wandering without purpose. It simply means trusting that the path will reveal itself step by step, moment by moment, without demanding a full itinerary before you begin. The wise have always known this. You can see it in the way certain people move through life, as if they're listening for something subtle, as if each decision is a conversation with the unknown rather than a battle against it. Life rarely gives you the whole melody at once. It offers it note by note, trusting you to follow the sound even when you can't predict where it leads. This is why certainty can feel so suffocating. It tries to force the entire song to play before you've even grown quiet enough to hear the first measure. And perhaps that is why this message found you now, in this particular chapter, because some part of you is already learning to trust the spaces between things, to trust the pauses, to trust the unplanned turns that keep arriving with curious timing. You're beginning to sense that the universe is not indifferent, but intimate, moving with you, not against you. If reflections like these help you open a little more into your own timing, you're welcome to subscribe. Think of it less as following a channel and more as allowing these reminders to reach you at the exact moment they're meant to. But this expansion into uncertainty raises another deeper question, one that hums beneath every quiet turning in a person's life. If you no longer demand certainty, and you no longer grip the future with fear, then what begins to guide you? What becomes the compass when the map dissolves? The next part of the rhythm has already started forming its answer. There are moments in a person's life when everything seems to slip just a little out of rhythm, as if the world has shifted half an inch to the left and forgotten to tell them. Devin had been living in that crooked half inch for months. To the outside world, he looked functional enough, showing up at work, answering emails, smiling in the right places. But inside, he felt that uneasy drift, the feeling of being slightly off course without knowing which direction on course even pointed to anymore. He woke each morning with the same tightness in his chest, that subtle ache of someone who believes they should be further along by now. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet exhaustion that accumulates from too many days spent pretending to be fine. And on the morning everything shifted, he felt it more sharply than usual. The air seemed too thick. The city felt too fast. Time itself felt like a train leaving the station without him. He rushed out the door anyway, convinced he could outrun the heaviness if he just moved quickly enough. The bus he depended on was already pulling up to the intersection. Devin sprinted, weaving through people, determined not to lose even one more thing he was counting on. But the doors hissed shut with the indifferent precision of machinery, locking him out with a finality that stung more than it should have. He stopped in the cold morning air, breath burning in his lungs, frustration rising like heat behind his eyes. It felt symbolic, too symbolic, as if life were sending a message he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. He muttered under his breath a string of impatience and resignation. He wasn't angry at the bus. He was angry at himself. for not being where he thought he should be, for feeling like a guest in his own life. And in that fragile moment, something subtle happened. Not externally, internally. The first crack in the story he'd been telling himself. The faint beginning of a shift he couldn't yet recognize. This is how turning points often begin, not with clarity, but with collapse. Not with revelation, but with frustration. Not with a clean, cinematic moment, but with a missed bus and a heart too tired to pretend. And tucked inside that small unraveling lived the question he didn't know he was already answering. When life feels like it's pulling you off course, what if it's actually guiding you toward what you would never have chosen on your own? The proof was already walking toward him. The bench at the bus stop was colder than Devon expected. The kind of cold that seeps through fabric and into bone. He sat there anyway, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together as if he were holding his frustration in place. The city moved around him, cars rushing past, strangers in winter coats, steam rising from sewer grates. But it all felt distant, blurred, as though someone had turned down the volume on the world. A few minutes passed before another figure approached the bench. An older man lowered himself slowly onto the far side, his jeans marked with dried paint. His thermos dented in a way that suggested it had been dropped more times than he'd care to admit. He didn't look at Devon immediately. Instead, he watched the road with the patient stillness of someone who has learned not to rush mornings. Only after a moment did he say softly, "Rough start?" Devon almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt strangely relieving to have the chaos of his morning acknowledged by someone who seemed to understand without prying. He exhaled, long and defeated. "Yeah, long morning." The man nodded as if he'd expected that answer. A quiet settled between them, companionable in a way Devon couldn't explain. Eventually, the older man spoke again, not dramatically, not like someone offering wisdom, but simply stating something he had clearly learned the slow way. "You're not trapped," he said. "You're just tired." The words landed with an odd weight, gentle but precise. Not advice, not correction. More like a truth Devon had misplaced, returned to him by a stranger who had no idea he was delivering a turning point. It felt like the kind of sentence you don't understand fully in the moment, but somehow know you'll return to for years. Devon didn't quit his job that day. Instead, he walked in differently. Less like someone being squeezed by circumstance, and more like someone open to possibility. What followed would reshape the next chapter of his life, though he couldn't have predicted that from a cold bench at dawn. And this is often how it happens. A whisper in an ordinary moment becomes the hinge that swings an entire life in a new direction. If a moment like that ever found you, quiet, unexpected, strangely perfect, you're welcome to share it in the comments. Someone out there might need your story more than you realize. There is a moment, usually subtle, when a person realizes that life was never withholding anything from them. It's rarely dramatic. It doesn't arrive with a triumphant chord or the sweeping lift of an orchestral revelation. Instead, it comes the way dawn comes, quietly, and only noticeable once the darkness has already begun to soften. For most people, the true turning isn't when something new appears, but when the eyes finally adjust to what has been waiting there all along. Guidance doesn't always shout. It doesn't demand your attention. It simply stands at the edge of your awareness, like a familiar figure you've walked past a dozen times without noticing. And when you finally look, truly look, it feels less like discovery and more like remembering. As if some old part of you, worn but patient, has been holding the door open the entire time. And so the realization begins to take shape. Your confusion wasn't a failure to see the truth. It was part of the path toward recognizing it. Every misstep, every restless night, every moment you thought you were drifting farther from yourself was actually a kind of preparation, a loosening, a softening, a clearing of the inner clutter that once made clarity impossible. Pain, too, plays its role, not as punishment, but as an invitation. It cracks the shell you've outgrown. It breaks open the ground so something new can take root. The moments that felt like unraveling were simply parts of you that no longer matched who you were becoming. And while the mind argues that things should have made sense sooner, the heart knows better. It knows timing has always been precise, even when the meaning lagged behind. There's a quiet humor in the whole thing, realizing that the message you kept searching for was sitting patiently at your feet, tapping its fingers, waiting for you to slow down enough to notice. It's the kind of realization that draws a small breath of relief, the exhale that finally acknowledges, oh, it was here the whole time. But this understanding leads naturally to a deeper curiosity, one that settles into the bones. If readiness is what allows truth to surface, then what does readiness actually feel like? How do you recognize the moment when something inside you finally aligns with what life has been trying to give you? That answer is already forming in the quiet spaces of your awareness. Readiness doesn't arrive like a sudden bolt of certainty. It comes as a texture, a shift in the fine grain of your experience. Often it begins in the body long before the mind catches up. The breath deepens almost accidentally. The shoulders lower by a few degrees. The world feels less like something to brace against and more like something you can lean into. You notice the small things again, the warmth of a cup in your hands, the way light pools on the floor, the simple relief of not rushing. There's a looseness to true readiness. It feels like stepping into a familiar room that has been rearranged just slightly, enough to make you pause, but not enough to unsettle you. Something inside you aligns, soft, but unmistakable. A kind of inner resonance, like a tuning fork struck gently in the heart. You may not know the next step, but you sense that you are no longer working against yourself, that for once you and life are walking in the same direction. Readiness often unfolds in the most mundane moments. When you stop trying to force an idea, and it floats back to you hours later, complete and effortless. When a memory surfaces, bringing clarity instead of ache. When a single sentence, a whisper, not a shout, lands with more truth than entire chapters of advice ever have. It's the soft click of something falling into place inside you. Metaphors try their best to explain it. A leaf finally surrendering to the river's current. A season turning with quiet inevitability. The soil warms just enough for the seed to stir. Readiness is never dramatic. It is natural, instinctive, and deeply human. And if something in you is resonating with these words, not loudly, but with that subtle inner hum, you're welcome to revisit this moment later. Some messages unfold in layers, revealing their shape only after the heart has had time to stretch into them. But readiness, once felt, brings its own question. If you no longer chase the moment, and instead let it come to you, how does life change? What becomes possible when you move with the rhythm that has been carrying you all along? The next turn of the journey is already waiting. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes at the end of a long inner struggle. Not the silence of defeat, but the stillness of recognition. The moment when you finally understand that the thing you've been chasing was never ahead of you, but woven into every step you've taken. It's almost comical, in a gentle way, how long it can take to realize that you were never outside your own life, never wandering off some invisible path, never late for a destiny that was supposedly waiting 2 blocks ahead. You were always inside it, the way a fish is inside water, long before it knows what water is. People spend years believing they're falling behind, comparing themselves to imagined timelines, invisible finish lines, expectations borrowed from strangers. They move through their days gripping the idea that they should have arrived somewhere by now, some wiser, more polished version of themselves. And yet the truth sits quietly in the periphery. There is no schedule. There is no cosmic clock. The universe has never leaned over your shoulder with a stopwatch. If you look back with softer eyes, you can see it. Every so-called detour placed you in the exact room where a needed conversation happened. Every delay positioned you in front of someone you didn't know you needed. Every moment you thought was wasted time was quietly preparing you to receive what wasn't meant to make sense earlier. Even your confusion was not a sign of distance from your path, but a sign of proximity to a shift you couldn't yet articulate. The great paradox is that awakening doesn't move you forward. It brings you inward. It dissolves the imagined distance between where you think you should be and where you actually are. It dissolves the dream of separation, the illusion that you and life have been moving in different directions. It reveals something astonishingly simple. You were never late, because life doesn't measure time the way you do. It doesn't rush. It isn't demanding. It simply unfolds. And once you feel this, even for a moment, you also feel the relief, the softening, the subtle, almost amused realization that the rhythm that carried you here has been steady all along, patiently waiting for the moment you were quiet enough to hear it. Which brings us gently to the final truth, the one waiting just around the bend. Once you understand you were never late, you can finally see why this moment, of all possible moments, found you exactly now. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes at the end of a long inner struggle. Not the silence of defeat, but the stillness of recognition. The moment when you finally understand that the thing you've been chasing was never ahead of you, but woven into every step you've taken. It's almost comical, in a gentle way, how long it can take to realize that you were never outside your own life, never wandering off some invisible path, never late for a destiny that was supposedly waiting 2 blocks ahead. You were always inside it, the way a fish is inside a water long before it knows what water is. People spend years believing they're falling behind, comparing themselves to imagined timelines, invisible finish lines, expectations borrowed from strangers. They move through their days gripping the idea that they should have arrived somewhere by now, some wiser, more polished version of themselves. And yet the truth sits quietly in the periphery. There is no schedule. There is no cosmic clock. The universe has never leaned over your shoulder with a stopwatch. If you look back with softer eyes, you can see it. Every so-called detour placed you in the exact room where a needed conversation happened. Every delay positioned you in front of someone you didn't know you needed. Every moment you thought was wasted time was quietly preparing you to receive what wasn't meant to make sense earlier. Even your confusion was not a sign of distance from your path, but a sign of proximity to a shift you couldn't yet articulate. The great paradox is that awakening doesn't move you forward. It brings you inward. It dissolves the imagined distance between where you think you should be and where you actually are. It dissolves the dream of separation, the illusion that you and life have been moving in different directions. It reveals something astonishingly simple. You were never late, because life doesn't measure time the way you do. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand. It simply unfolds. And once you feel this, even for a moment, you also feel the relief, the softening, the subtle, almost amused realization that the rhythm that carried you here has been steady all along, patiently waiting for the moment you were quiet enough to hear it. Which brings us gently to the final truth, the one waiting just around the bend. Once you understand you were never late, you can finally see why this moment, of all possible moments, found you exactly now. There is a tenderness to endings, especially when they arrive with clarity instead of urgency. This moment doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't pressure or correct or insist that you transform in the next 5 minutes. It simply offers itself as a reminder, quiet, steady, and timely, that you are not lost, not broken, not lagging behind some unseen standard. You are moving, breathing, unfolding exactly as you were meant to, carried by a rhythm older than your doubts and gentler than your fears. Look back for a moment, not with judgment, but with compassion. Notice how the events you once labeled as mistakes became turning points, how the people you met by accident ended up shaping entire chapters, how the conversations you didn't plan delivered truths you didn't know you needed. Nothing was wasted, not the pauses, not the heartbreaks, not the long stretches of uncertainty. Even the detours had integrity, guiding you in ways you only recognize now from the vantage of distance. This is the quiet artistry of divine timing. It doesn't rush to impress you. It doesn't overwhelm you with flashing signs. It weaves meaning through the smallest details, a glance, a sentence, a moment you might have dismissed if you had been moving even a little faster. The extraordinary hides inside the ordinary, waiting for the instant your heart is steady enough to notice. And here you are. Not because you stumbled, not because you failed, but because something in you, something tired or curious or quietly hopeful, was ready for this reminder, ready to hear that nothing in your story has been out of place, ready to feel that subtle warmth of being exactly where you need to be. If someone you care for is moving through their own fog, their own confusion, their own sense of being late, you're welcome to share this with them. Not as advice, not as a correction, simply as a gentle hand extended in the dark, the way this moment extended itself to you. Sometimes the most meaningful direction doesn't come with thunder. Sometimes it arrives through us. And as this chapter closes, feel the stillness settling around you, not ending, but integrating. Let it remind you that life is never early, never late. It is always right on time. And now, so are you.